his no-show rate, he said, dropped to 0% once virtual meetings start. So again, I think we see the positive there of screen time in that, it can take the place of something else that we would have done in the past in person, but now we're doing it, over screen. Again, some of that is just for convenience. So the second question then that was posed, what are some warning signs that things are going wrong? So there was a lot of things that, he focused on in here, but just a couple to highlight. So again, if you are not sleeping, falling behind in school, withdrawing just from your regular day-to-day activities, whether it be from your friends or from your family, and instead filling that void with screen time, then definitely that's a warning sign that things are starting to go wrong. When your day-to-day functions are impaired, so when you're missing school or missing work or doing things such as overeating or not eating at all because the screen has gotten in the way of that, then that's definitely a warning sign that it's too much. When we're looking at screens and, social media as a self-care technique, that's definitely another warning sign that he mentioned in the podcast, that things are going wrong. A couple of other things that he mentioned too, though, when it comes to social media, he talked about how social media doesn't really cause the problems that he was seeing with his patients, but social media was kind of amplifying those problems and making them more present. Also, another reason when things are starting to go wrong, when we're looking at overuse of a screen as a necessary way, because our needs are not being met, so we're using our screens to meet those needs instead. Or also when we're pursuing screens just to make ourselves feel better. Then I think those are definitely all warning signs where things are starting to go wrong. And, you can look at screens as just like any addiction. So, you can take out screen time and fill in the blank with a different addiction and just all the things I just mentioned when that addiction is, filling needs, filling voids, or we're using that instead of doing our regular day-to-day social activities that we would have done in the past. Then I definitely think there's a warning signs that things are going wrong. And then number 3, then, what can we do about it? So again, a couple of just tips that he had as we went through the podcast. So the first one, he said, treat technology as the platform it is. So treat it with respect. We need to teach kids, if we're teachers, teach kids how to use it appropriately. Teach kids how screens can still be used and not interfere with day-to-day activities. If we're parents, I think we need to make sure that we're teaching that to our kids as well. Teaching them how to use their screens appropriately, teaching them how to use them safely, being good digital citizens, which I know my school and many others around, that's been a new curriculum piece that they've started implementing into just every year learning is teaching our students how to be good digital citizens. The second thing, or another thing that he mentioned, is making sure we're implementing downtime. So again, having specific times in our day where no matter what, we're not going to be on the screen. So whether that is, in the morning when you wake up, the first hour that you're awake, you're not going to get on your screen. Or before you go to bed, the last 30 minutes or an hour before you go to bed, you're not going to be on your screen, giving yourself a chance to wind down. Setting app limits, making sure that we're only on certain apps for certain amounts of times, and then cutting it right there. Another thing that he mentioned, I thought that was interesting, is actually using screens, especially if you're parents. So playing games with your children so that you can understand them and let your child turn into the student and teach you something. He said that's something that was actually helpful in terms of, making sure that we're using screens appropriately is actually being engaged with our kids with their screens, so they're not just running to their room and being on their screens for hours on end by themselves without any adult interaction. And also the other thing he mentioned there, making sure that we as adults, we're not hypocritical. So, we're always telling our students and our own children, limit screen time, limit screen time, limit screen time. But at the same time, we as adults, we're always turning to our screens, even when we have just a simple down moment in our day, whether it's walking up the steps or riding an elevator or waiting for the bus or whatever you're doing. People tend to jump right to their screens. Then he wrapped up his podcast then just with 3 kind of overall tips then that I just wanted to mention. So, the first one he said was be balanced, making sure we're balancing our screen time versus no screen time. Being mindful, so again, using screens for what they were meant to be used for, not because we're bored, or not to replace another social function that we would have done in the past, but instead we've implemented screens instead of doing that. And then finally, again, just being present, whether that is your job, your school or just your life, if you have your own children or your own family or whatever, just being present and not using screens as a substitute. So those are just some things that I pulled out. I thought this podcast was really, really interesting as we dive into this class. So looking forward to working with everyone this semester and looking forward to the discussions that we'll have.